It was quite different from anything I'd ever experienced or had knowledge of before. But we had finished our basic training and was ready to go overseas. And we got on a troop train in Colorado and went to New York. Spent 2 nights there, just kind of standing in line, so to speak. We didn't do anything except eat and sleep while we were there for those 2 days. But we got on another little troop train and went to the harbor in New York, and Red Cross was there with cookies and coffee, and we were all bundled up with our gear, personal gear that we were supposed to have. We got in line and marched out on the deck of the port, and I saw this huge ship. I had never seen anything like that before. They told us it was the Queen Elizabeth. That was quite a deal. I had heard of the Queen Elizabeth, but I had no idea that it was so big. When we got on inside, it was all the fancy, luxurious things that were in it had been taken out, and most of the ship was wall to wall with sleeping cots, and 3, one on top of the other. And we had thousands of people to put in there. So we went to our assigned little room, which would have been a luxurious place before, but now all the luxury stuff, decorations, had been taken out, made room for thousands of men. And the Queen Elizabeth, the major ballroom on the first deck was mostly still intact, and it was highly decorated with drapes and a few chairs. It was a big ballroom. That part was very impressive, but we only had time to walk through that and down into the bottom of the ship, and we slept and eat there like that for about 7 days. I think took us about 7 days to get over to our destination. On the way over, we would be allowed to go out on the upper deck and get fresh air and look around the big guns that had been mounted on the outer deck. One day, while we were up there, they let us observe the guns being fired, and there were huge things. It's hard to describe how big they were. but they fired those things and it shook the whole deck of the ship when they fired. That was, I guess, a prelude to what might be coming. But we went on a zigzag journey, constantly changing directions to avoid being attacked by German submarines. We had no trouble, so no other action or anything. We got to someplace in Scotland, I believe, where we docked and began to unload onto another troop train. And the troop train then took us to England, and it was night when we got there, probably planned for that reason, to arrive at night. We got to our barracks at Mendlesham and got off. We went to eat, and it was very heavy fog, very heavy, thick. We only had one little light. It was an old-timey lantern, and that was how we walked with that lantern to show us the path to the mess hall where we ate. We stayed there in that fog for a day or two, and finally, when the fog cleared, we were able to go to the buildings where we were introduced to some of the proceedings, what things looked like around the base. And we had been trained in the United States to fly the B-24. But when we got to England, we were assigned to a B-17 outfit, and we had to get reacquainted with that airplane. The pilot and all the different members of the crew had to get reacquainted with where all the equipment was, and that took a few days. And then we had to take a flight test, take the airplane up for an hour or two, and come back and practice landing. And we went through that process for 3 or 4 or 5 days. On our first mission over enemy territory, we were, of course, anxious and afraid of what might happen. And sure enough, it did. The German big guns shot at us, and with the explosion around all through the air, our plane managed not to get hit. Some of the planes did get hit real bad, and of course the engines failed and they crashed. We made it back okay, but it was a frightening experience. But after you have done that a few times, some of the things we had to do became more or less routine. On some of the other missions, with all the shooting flak around, always frightening, more or less doing your job. There was nothing to shoot at because it was all flak. You get shot at lots of times. You never get used to it. It's an experience. I hope you never have to do that. We flew 25 combat missions over Germany, France, and Czechoslovakia. We got hit only once or twice by the big guns from the ground, and we were very lucky. A lot of the people didn't come back at all, but when they got shot down, sometimes you could look down at them as the plane was going down, and flame and smoke. Sometimes you could count the parachutes that opened, and that told us that at least some of the men got out of the plane before it crashed. We had a Quonset hut, that's that rounded metal thing, and inside that was a pot-bellied stove heated with coal, and there was about 10 or 15 people in that small, stacked 3 deep, sleeping. Occasionally, while we were there, we could go to the so-called recreation center. We could walk a couple of blocks. All we found was another Quonset hut, but at least it had a pool table and a ping pong table and a place to sit down at a small table and write letters. Sometimes we had recreation equipment that we could check out and use. Sometimes another fellow and I had baseball gloves and a baseball. We'd go outside the Quonset hut and pitch baseball, throw baseball back and forth. I never went to a medical facility overseas, but I can tell you what they were like. They were an enlarged Quonset hut that contained limited amount of medical equipment, x-ray machine, doctors, nurses, men, nurses, but actually I never went for any sickness or injury there. At our base in Mendlesham, we had plenty of food. It was fairly good, but not very good. We always had on the table a quart jar of applesauce, and we always had loaves of bread. We could eat all we wanted anytime out of the chow line. But one time, Verb Holcomb, our tail gunner, and I really liked the applesauce and bread. So on the way out of the mess hall, I hid a loaf of bread under my coat, and he hid a can of applesauce under his big heavy coat that we were wearing. And we took that back to our barracks and had fun eating that. We flew 25 combat missions. We flew some other practice missions. And sometimes the weather was so bad over our target area that we were not able to find the target, and we had to turn around and go back to our base. We didn't get credit for those type missions because we brought our bombs back instead of dropping them. After the war and everything was safe, the pilot and some of the other officers talked about we had been over there doing all this combat stuff, but we had never set foot on the European continent. So the pilot and the co-pilot decided we'll make a little problem here. We will pretend that we got engine trouble and we need to land. And so we did at a small airbase, airstrip, somewhere, I believe it was in Holland or up in that part of the country. A couple of the officers on the plane borrowed a Jeep from the ground crew, and they went into the little village and came back with arms full of champagne and wine. They loaded it back on the plane, and we took off and went back home. In England, I don't recall ever seeing any of the wine and champagne. I think the officers kept that to themselves. But that was all fun anyway. In the military, I was thrown into a group of men that I lived with, worked with, I went into a totally different society. Economically, I came from a small farm. Some of the other people came from big cities, New York, anywhere, all over. I got acquainted with different kinds of people that I was not accustomed to. But at the same time, everybody else was experiencing the same thing happening to them. Everybody was thrown into a large group. No friends, no enemies, they're just there. Occasionally we have made good friends with some special people like you. We enjoyed each other when we were in the military, knowing each other and talking to each other like you. Those experiences were good, but a lot of the other experiences and exchange with people that I was not familiar with, their economy, their morals might be quite different from everybody else. I'm not saying they were good or bad, but some of them were bad. Basically, it comes down to kill or be killed. That's sad. That's bad about any war. It's either kill you or you kill me. I learned a lot about life. It meant that I had to do whatever I had to do to achieve whatever the big overhaul mission was. I had to do what I was told to do, whether I liked it or not. I did that, and later in life, I guess it helped me to be more determined in my own life back here in the United States. Helped me to know that I had to work hard, keep pushing until I achieve at least part of what I wanted to do. That went a long way in my life. It will go a long way in your life. There are some good experiences that I had in the military. Some of them were lifelong influence. I got reacquainted with all of my flight crew several years after we got back home. And we recounted and we retold all the stories that we experienced in the war. Some, like I have said, very frightening. Some, occasionally, we clearly laughed about. Funny things would happen to us or to my good friends, and we laughed about those things. Today is a different world from what I grew up in. young people today, hopefully, and I pray that they will grow up loving their country, respecting each other with dignity, and pray for the world to come to some kind of peace.